Final Fight Revenge is completely ridiculous. Back in 1989, Final Fight was considered one of the quintessential arcade games of its era, a classic everyone had to play. Sadly, the same can't be said for this title. Today we're diving into a forgotten chapter in Capcom's arcade history, where they took the beloved beat-em-up Final Fight and twisted it into this 3D fighting game with, let's just say, mixed results. Enter Final Fight Revenge, a Sega Saturn release that's as infamous as it is obscure. This isn't the amazing Final Fight you remember. It's a bizarre, clunky experience that left fans scratching their heads and critics wondering what exactly went wrong. So grab your joystick and get ready for a wild ride as we explore how Final Fight went from beloved brawler to, well, whatever Final Fight Revenge turned out to be. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the embarrassing history of Final Fight Revenge. Yeah! Arcade-style beat-em-ups. You've got to love this fine genre. While a period existed in the mid-90s where certain brands were trying to pivot away from this style of play, fortunately brilliant brawlers are back and we have found ourselves living through a beat-em-up renaissance period. Score massive discounts on incredible modern beat-em-ups like Double Dragon Gaiden, Streets of Rage 4, River City Girls 2, and the amazing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, all through my affiliate links below. Save up to 90% on thousands of modern AAA retro and indie titles just by using the links in my pinned comment. Snag amazing deals and support my content at the same time. Happy shopping! On this channel, we've taken countless deep dives into the beat-em-up genre's colourful past, and Final Fight is a brand we simply cannot ignore. From its iconic arcade debut to the Super Nintendo trilogy that followed, Final Fight has been nothing short of a phenomenon. But here's where things get interesting. Not everyone knows that the series didn't actually end with these SNES classics. Final Fight had more to offer, a beat in a way that left many fans disappointed. Years after leaving the arcade behind back in 1989, a decade later, Capcom tried to resurrect Final Fight by taking it back to the arcades, and even releasing a home console version. Yet the game barely left a mark, and those who did play it were mostly unimpressed. So what exactly went wrong? Could this entry really be as dreadful as critics have claimed? Well, let's dig in and see if it's the disaster it's often painted to be. Now, we've often talked about how Capcom's first Final Fight game was a game changer. When it launched, it was the most polished beat-em-up on the market and set the stage for classics like Streets of Rage. But as the series continued on the SNES, something was missing. The sequels offered solid gameplay, but by the time Final Fight 3 arrived in 1995, it was clear the series hadn't kept pace. Gaming had evolved massively since 1989, yet Final Fight remained stuck in its original mould. So, with recycled mechanics and little innovation, the game was already dated on release. By the mid-90s, a seismic shift was underway in gaming. Developers were transitioning from the classic 2D sprites of old to bold new 3D polygon models. This experimentation led to some stunning breakthroughs and plenty of missteps. Studios were venturing into uncharted territory, each trying different techniques to stay relevant in a world that was increasingly drawn to 3D visuals. And as consumer preference moved rapidly towards 3D, the once beloved 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up started to fall by the wayside. The shift spelled the end for many of these games, as translating the fast, punchy gameplay of beat-em-ups into a 3D space proved challenging with few true successes. One standout, of course, was Die Hard Arcade, known as Dynamite Decker in Japan, a game designed by none other than Makoto Uchida, the creative mind behind both the original Golden Axe and the stellar Revenge of Death Adder, which we have explored on here in the past. But for the most part, the versus fighting game was outpacing the beat-em-up. In fact, Sega deserves a specific mention, as they were among the first to master polygonal-based gaming full stop. The groundbreaking Virtua Fighter created by Yu Suzuki and Seiichi Ishii demonstrated the incredible potential of 3D graphics, bringing characters to life in a whole new way. Unlike Sega, who embraced this new frontier with pioneering titles, Capcom approached it cautiously, and by the mid-90s they lacked both the technology and the expertise to fully embrace 3D. And this hesitation would define Capcom's slower transition in those early days of the polygon revolution. During this whirlwind era of change, Seiichi Ishii, one of the masterminds behind Virtua Fighter, made a bold move. He left Sega to join Namco, paving the way for the Tekken series and unleashing even more iconic 3D fighting games. Meanwhile, Capcom was sticking to what they did best: 2D fighters. Franchises like Darkstalkers and the Street Fighter Alpha games were thriving. catering to hardcore fans who craved the faster response times and pinpoint accuracy that 2D sprites delivered, something still elusive in the polygon-based fighter space. As 3D fighters gained popularity and the beat-em-up genre waned, Capcom saw a golden opportunity. What if Final Fight, a series that had always flirted with fighting mechanics, transformed fully into a fighting game? After all, Street Fighter, arguably the most successful fighting franchise ever, shared its universe, and even its origins with Final Fight, once known as Street Fighter 89. The transition felt almost like destiny, a natural evolution. With Capcom at the helm, one of the founding fathers of the fighting genre, expectations were high for Final Fight's transformation, yet what fans got fell far short of a legacy they'd hoped for. What went wrong, and how did such a promising concept miss the mark? Let's explore where the Final Fight series stumbled on its journey into the ring. Earlier we noted that Capcom wisely prioritised 2D sprite-based fighters, a realm they dominated, but that didn't mean they ignored the rising trend of polygon fighters completely. In 1996, for example, Capcom dipped its toes into 3D, with Star Gladiator under the director of Akira Yasuda, one of the creative forces behind Street Fighter 2. While Star Gladiator was a respectable effort, it suffered from low frame rates, and Yasuda soon left Capcom to start his own studio. Capcom then tackled the Street Fighter EX series, which while not groundbreaking held its own in the late 90s 3D fighter lineup, but that was alongside Eureka. By 1997 and 1998, Capcom was hitting its stride in 3D with games like Plasma Sword, the Star Gladiator sequel, and the standout Rival Schools, which introduced polished tag team mechanics. With these advances creating a 3D fighting game around the Final Fight cast, by 1999 felt like a logical next step. Final Fight Revenge was born out of a collaboration between Capcom's Japanese and American divisions. While the design took place in Japan, all programming was managed in the US by Capcom Digital, a new team eager to prove themselves. Leading the design was Tatsuya Nishijima, a veteran with credits on X-Men vs Street Fighter, Alien vs Predator, and Darkstalkers 3. So how did such a promising team and concept go astray? Let's dig deeper. Final Fight Revenge may look like a relic from 1994, but surprisingly, it was released as late as 1999. Yes, Capcom launched this game the same year Yu Suzuki, co-creator of Virtua Fighter, completed and released Shenmue. Somehow though, putting out a game that looked like this in 1999 was still deemed acceptable. But graphics alone don't make or break a game, so let's see if Final Fight Revenge has any hidden strengths beneath its outdated appearance. Originally developed on the STV arcade board, short for Sega Titan Video, this game was meant to run on the hardware that by 1999 standards was already ancient. The STV was first introduced in 1994 and closely mirrored the Sega Saturn, allowing games to be easily ported to the home console. The name itself, Titan, is a clever nod to Saturn's moon, a fitting touch if only the game itself had the same spark. So here we are, with a dated looking fighting game built on equally dated arcade hardware. But it's Capcom, right? This is the same company behind Street Fighter, and this game draws from a trilogy of beloved classics. Surely the fighting mechanics and character designs bring some quality to the table, right? Well, let's take a closer look to find out if there's any substance hidden within Final Fight Revenge. While the Final Fight trilogy on the Super Nintendo offered diverse lineups of characters and enemies across each game, Final Fight Revenge chose to ignore most of its legacy. Instead, it gave players a roster limited to fighters from the very first Final Fight game only, which had debuted a full decade earlier in 1989. By 1999, fighting games were expected to feature massive character rosters, often surpassing 30 playable characters. Yet Final Fight Revenge gave us just 10, even fewer than Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, which Capcom released way back in 1992. At least some beloved characters from the original game like Guy, Cody and Hagar made the cut, alongside memorable enemies like Sodom, Poison and Damned. Characters like Andor and Relento also make appearances, but others like Elgato, Eddie E lacked the recognition as fan favourites, partly because they didn't reappear in other Final Fight or Street Fighter titles. The omission of characters like Lucia, Dean and Maki and Carlos feels like a significant missed opportunity too, especially given the already small roster. Expanding the lineup with these characters would have brought much needed variety and possibly boost the game's appeal. Capcom's decision here might have been a strategic holdback, reserving popular characters for potential turbo or super editions of this game if it proved a hit. You know exactly what they're like. a tactic they've used successfully for other franchises. So as you can see, Final Fight Revenge stumbled with low quality graphics and a lackluster character roster, but could its fighting mechanics redeem it in any way? In terms of controls, Final Fight Revenge follows a familiar arcade-style setup, using a joystick and multiple attack buttons. But unlike many fighters with a standard 4-button layout, this game introduced a 5th special button, bringing some unique mechanics into play. This special button allows players to sidestep into the foreground or background, providing a subtle twist on combat by letting fighters dodge incoming attacks. Even more interesting, this button also lets players pick up items for use as weapons or health boosts, a nostalgic callback to the classic Final Fight beat-em-up style. These items, hidden in crates like in the original game, range from melee to projectile weapons, however the impact of using them often feels underwhelming. Flamethrowers and machine guns, for example, barely dent opponents' health, leaving players with a sense of missed potential. Players can store up to 3 weapons in their inventory and swap between them, a feature likely intended to deepen the gameplay, though it doesn't fully hit the mark. The core mechanics remain fairly standard. Each character has a set of unique grappling moves and super moves, activated after filling up a super gauge, a familiar mechanic seen in other Capcom fighters. This gauge-based system even carries over from Final Fight 3, adding a touch of continuity, which is nice. While some of the super moves are unexpectedly wild, more reminiscent of Streets of Rage than Final Fight, they do bring a bit of charm and humour, injecting a light-hearted flair that adds some much-needed fun to the experience. In single-player mode, players battle through 6 opponents before facing off with a zombie version of Belgar, the final boss from the original Final Fight. It's almost charmingly self-aware for Capcom to bring back Belgar as an undead, showing they had a sense of humour about the game's over-the-top elements. The choice feels similar to fighting Zombie Chef in South Park with Stick of Truth. And after each character's ending, the credits roll to Belgar performing Michael Jackson's Thriller dance, a clear nod that the game isn't taking itself too seriously. Final Fight Revenge was initially developed for the Sega Titan Video arcade board, as mentioned earlier, but it did, as also mentioned, get a home release on the Sega Saturn, which didn't arrive until the year 2000, though only in Japan, where the Saturn still held a small market presence. In fact, it was reportedly one of the final titles ever released for the platform. When it launched, reviews were mostly negative, with critics pointing out the outdated graphics and shallow roster and the uninspired mechanics. It was seen as a low point for the Final Fight franchise. Fortunately for Capcom, characters from the Final Fight series continue to appear in Street Fighter, keeping the legacy alive and helping fans overlook this misstep. After Final Fight Revenge, Capcom Digital underwent restructuring and was eventually renamed to Capcom Studio 8. This new team would later take another shot at reviving the Final Fight series with Final Fight Streetwise on the PlayStation 2. Another mess that is always fun to discuss. As for Final Fight Revenge, its limited release as a Sega Saturn exclusive in Japan meant that very few players ever experienced, or perhaps endured the game. Yet because of its rarity, physical copies of Final Fight Revenge have become prized items among collectors, fetching high prices for those eager to own a forgotten slice of gaming history. In a strange twist, Capcom might find some solace in the fact that most gamers aren't even aware of this title's existence. As of now, no matter what way we look at it, Final Fight Revenge stands out as an oddity in Capcom's rich history, a reminder of the experimental days when the gaming industry was rapidly transitioning from 2D sprites to 3D polygons. Capcom tried to take a beloved series, one that thrived in a side-scrolling beat-em-up format, and reimagine it within the popular fighting game genre. Yet by sticking to outdated hardware, limiting the roster, and failing to bring fresh mechanics to the table, Final Fight Revenge struggled to capture the magic of its predecessors. Instead, it became a curious misstep, one that left fans and critics alike scratching their heads. The game's lackluster release and mixed reception highlight the challenges Capcom faced in balancing innovation with fan expectations. While Capcom was perfecting 2D fighters and slowly finding its footing in 3D with titles like Rival Schools, Final Fight Revenge fell short of the brand's standards. It's almost as if this installment was a trial by fire, an ambitious attempt that simply didn't meet the quality Capcom had built its reputation on. Ironically, its limited release as a Sega Saturn exclusive in Japan may have been its saving grace. Only a handful of fans worldwide ever experienced it firsthand, and over time it became more of a collector's treasure than a gaming hit. Today, Final Fight Revenge remains that rare collectible, fetching high prices amongst those intrigued by this forgotten chapter. And while it didn't deliver the exhilarating experience fans hoped for, it ultimately preserved the main series' legacy by remaining relatively obscure. With characters like Hagar, Cody and Guy still finding life in Capcom's Street Fighter universe, Final Fight has continued to influence gaming culture, without this entry tarnishing its legacy too much. In the grand story of Final Fight, revenge serves as a quirky detour rather than the final word, a peculiar artifact of the 3D transition era, destined to be remembered only by the most devoted fans. While sadly not a great beat 'em up like its predecessors, don't forget you can score massive discounts on incredible modern beat 'em ups like Double Dragon Gaiden, Streets of Rage 4, Rue City Girls 2, and the amazing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, all through my affiliate links below. Save up to 90% on thousands of modern AAA retro and indie titles just by using the link in my pinned comment. Snag amazing deals and support my content at exactly the same time. I honestly really appreciate it and love that you can experience such great games for next to nothing. Happy shopping, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheerio!